Welcome to the vocabulary video lecture. Vocabulary is one of the reading skills that we're talking about in elementary reading. Vocabulary is when students are immersed in a word-rich environment. Word-rich environments include regular independent reading, teachers reading aloud and modeling vocabulary words, as well as explicit vocabulary instruction, which includes vocabulary strategies that we'll talk about in a little bit. Most words are learned through reading and social interactions with family and friends. However, teachers play a vital role in expanding student vocabulary by teaching specific words and those word learning strategies. There's a strong correlation between vocabulary knowledge and reading achievement. It's common sense that students with larger vocabularies are stronger readers. Similarly, students who know more vocabulary strategies to figure out meanings of unfamiliar words have increased fluency and comprehension. In short, the more a student reads, the larger the student's vocabulary. The common phrase, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, applies to student vocabulary. The more a student reads, the more capable a reader is. They read more and become better readers through increased vocabulary. Also, the more capable the reader, the more challenging the books are that they read, therefore expanding that vocabulary even more. It's important to note that while students need to read often and a lot, vocabulary learning should not be left to chance. Vocabulary affects comprehension, writing, and learning in content areas, so it is very important to include and teach in our classrooms. The definition of vocabulary is the knowledge of words and word meanings. Words frequently used in language arts, social studies, science, and math are called academic vocabulary, and that's the large chunk of what we work with in our schools today. Academic vocabulary is found in books and textbooks. Teachers use them during mini lessons and explicit instruction as well as discussions. And students are expected to use academic vocabulary in assignments as well as high-stakes tests. We'll discuss some examples of academic vocabulary in a couple slides. Looking at the numbers, it's pretty amazing to see how much students grow in their vocabulary. It's an exciting rate that they're growing by. So as you can see on this slide, students expand their vocabulary by about 3,000 to 4,000 words per year, with 8 to 10 new vocabulary words each day. By the time students are graduating from high school, their vocabularies are reaching 25 to 50,000 words or more. And now we're going back to the more a student reads, the more the vocabulary grows. So 25,000 to 50,000, that's a pretty big jump. And obviously that continues as you continue your academic vocabulary in higher education or trade or a work environment. Getting into the importance of vocabulary, we know that vocabulary and reading achievement is connected. Like I said earlier, capable readers read more text, therefore expanding their vocabulary. We do know as teachers that all students come with varying levels of vocabulary, and teachers who immerse students in vocabulary-rich environments really have a unique opportunity to also increase student reading achievement, which really, that's our job. Teaching vocabulary, words and meanings, strategies, that is a part of our job to help students become capable readers. The unfortunate thing is students from low-income homes have less than half of the vocabulary that more affluent children possess. So I'm going to say that again to really let that sink in. Students from low-income homes have less than half of the vocabulary from students coming from more affluent homes. Some researchers are estimating that they know 1/4 to 1/5 of the words of their classmates. As we know from previous discussions, this gap continues to widen every year that students are in school. And so building that classroom library, providing students with the books, no matter the income level that they're coming from, is so important. It really has long-reaching effects. So learning vocabulary is high stakes in itself. There are 3 tiers of words. We have basic words, which are common words typically used socially. What I talked about before, learning words in social environments with family and friends. Typically, native English speakers don't need instruction on these tier 1 or basic words. Academic vocabulary, this is what we spend quite a bit of time in school. It has a wide application in school, used more frequently in written form, and instruction is required. Specialized terms, that also happens in school. This is getting into our content areas. So it's not taught in the language arts, but it is taught in science. So what are the science words that students need? What are the social studies words? And so that's the tier 3, those specialized terms. Here's some examples of this, and this might test your vocabulary knowledge. I'm sure the first one in language arts, we know most of these words, if not all. When we get into social studies, the word apartheid may be unfamiliar to you. This is a South African word, and it stands for a policy or system of segregation or discrimination on grounds of race. So hopefully today your academic vocabulary has increased. It's probably not increasing by 8 to 10 words per day like it was in the K-12 system, but we always continue to grow. So here's some different examples for you to look through of that academic vocabulary that will be taught in those K-12 systems. So what does vocabulary instruction look like in classrooms? Once again, I can't say this enough, students require immersion in vocabulary-rich environments in order to increase their knowledge of vocabulary or the knowledge of words and word meanings. So how do we do this? How do we immerse students in vocabulary-rich environments? One, a lot of daily independent reading, and daily is an important word to consider here. It needs to happen routinely, get students in that routine. The teacher read alouds, we talked about this, and then explicit instruction on words, word meanings, as well as different strategies that students can use to help identify words, to figure out what the word is and the word meaning independently from the teacher once they know those strategies. Most words are learned incidentally through reading and family activities. However, teachers do play a role in expanding student vocabulary by teaching specific words and those strategies. In word study concepts, we go beyond memorizing a definition of a word. Some examples you'll see in a classroom includes teaching multiple meanings of words, synonyms, antonyms, homonyms, root words and affixes, etymologies, which is a fancy name for the history of a word, figurative meanings, and so on. This, you're getting into some of the second grade and on type instruction with vocabulary and getting into, for example, homonyms. Some different classroom activities that we have available to us include word walls. We've seen a lot of these for the sight words. Now we can start getting into some word walls for academic vocabulary and some of the older grade levels. Definitely the explicit instruction that we've talked about several times with the modeled instruction, guided instruction, independent activities, some different word study activities. Also, some of these are considered vocabulary strategies that we'll talk a little bit more about. Explicit teaching of Tier 2 words is important, as well as providing multiple encounters with those words. I can't stress enough the building your classroom library with books. And when I was a teacher, I always let students take books home. In essence, the more they read, the better they will be, especially when they're provided with strategy instruction. Prior knowledge is an important thing for teachers to consider, as well as planning purposeful and meaningful mini lessons to teach explicitly words and those strategies so they can use them when they take some of your classroom books home and they're reading without the teacher right there. It's always interesting to look up in the Iowa Core and see how vocabulary is identified and broken down per grade. Getting into some of the vocabulary strategies, I'll just briefly explain the purpose of each of these that you can use in classrooms. The first one is word hunts, which is engaging students with text they've already read. Students are hunting for words that follow the same features as new words that they're learning. Word maps, this is a visual organizer to think about a word in multiple ways. A lot of times a word map will include the definition of the word, a synonym, an antonym, a picture. Some have drawings of the word. So there's multiple different things to include in a word map. The big thing is the visual organizer and thinking of the word in multiple ways. The list group label strategy is a form of semantic mapping. And like we've learned before, semantics, that's the meaning of a word. So categorizing the listed words through grouping and labeling based on the semantics. Possible sentences is a pre-reading strategy to help students activate that prior knowledge. Basically, it's providing a short list of vocabulary words that will be used in upcoming reading and writing out sentences, a meaningful sentence, whereas after students read the book, they're able to compare, did they have a correct sentence, and then altering it, making changes, fixing, and so on. The semantic feature analysis is students exploring how sets of things are related to one another using a grid. And the semantic gradients used to broaden and deepen students' understanding by understanding the continuum of words by order of degree. So gradients usually begin with opposites at each end of the continuum. So the different levels of word knowledge include the unknown word, students don't recognize it at all, to initial recognition, students have seen or heard the word but do not know the meaning. Partial word knowledge is where students know one meaning and can use it in a sentence. Where we eventually want to get students is the full word knowledge, where students know more than one meaning and can use it in several different ways. So how do we assess vocabulary? Typically, like everything that we're doing in reading instruction, everything is purposeful and with a meaning. So you definitely want to plan ahead how you assess student vocabulary. We need to monitor, and this is typically done through more informal means. A lot of teachers use observations as well as student conferences. And then when we get into the actual evaluation, oftentimes we use more authentic type assessments. Some examples of that would be rubrics. Quick writes would be putting a word on the board and having the student do a quick write, writing a couple sentences about what they know about the word. And then the strategy of word sorts that we talked about earlier is another good way to assess student academic vocabulary. So thank you very much. I hope you learned about academic vocabulary and the importance of expanding student vocabulary and the critical ties that it has to reading success.